Something phenomenal was happening in the American South. For centuries, the Cherokee people had largely considered writing the exclusive domain of white men. Yet here they were, in the words of the author Samuel Lorenzo Knapp, in the course of a few months, without school or expensive time or money, able to read and write in their own language. From Georgia to Arkansas, Cherokees began leaving each other notes, writing letters to distant countrymen, translating books of the Bible into Cherokee. The people have learned it from one another, remembered a visitor who passed through the Cherokee Nation in 1828. They cut the letters, or drew them with a piece of coal or with paint. Bark, trees, fences, the walls of houses answered the purpose of slates. Before long, the Cherokees had ordered a printing press from Boston with type cast in the characters of their new script. How was this possible? It would not have been but for the genius and perseverance of a single, unassuming, and remarkable individual. Stay tuned for the incredible triumph of Sequoyah on this episode of Bigfoot's Great American History Show. Unfortunately, there are few useful primary documents of Sequoyah's early life, which is perhaps unsurprising given, that whole absence of a Cherokee written language thing. Later accounts vary wildly, but the best historians can figure he was born in Tuskegee in present-day Tennessee, sometime prior to 1775, to a Cherokee mother named Wuh-teh and a white American father, likely Nathaniel Gist, who also happened to be the future grandfather of a U.S. Postmaster General and a Democratic vice presidential candidate. And indeed, Sequoyah was alternatively known in his lifetime as George Guess or sometimes George Gist. But whatever his parentage, he was raised entirely by his mother. Thus, he spoke only Cherokee or Tsalagi, and astoundingly had no education in any written language prior to developing his own. Yet his natural intelligence was evident from a young age. Self-taught in multiple disciplines, over the course of his life, he made a living as a trader, blacksmith, silversmith, and salt maker, and acquired renown as a painter and mechanic. In 1813, Sequoyah joined a Cherokee regiment allied with the United States in the Creek Wars, and subsequently fought against the Red Stick Creeks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. This despite a degenerative leg condition of disputed origin, which caused him to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. By then, he had likely already made his first attempts to create a written language for his people. Nearly all accounts date the start of this journey to 1809. He is variously recorded as having been inspired by a newspaper that blew past him while he was sitting at a creek, by the personal letters and official orders white soldiers wrote and received in the army, and by conversations with Cherokee companions, many of whom believed writing to be either witchcraft or a gift of God intended solely for whites. In any case, Sequoyah came to believe unequivocally in the power of written materials, or as he called them, talking leaves. While his own people were forced to rely on memory or oral tradition, white Americans communicated over great distances and accumulated knowledge generation upon generation. Sequoyah initially sought to create a pictorial symbol, or pictograph, for every word in the Cherokee language. According to one of his future interviewers, he had scratched out several thousand pictures before he recognized the impossibility of this task. Meanwhile, nearly all accounts agree that he was ridiculed and harassed for his efforts. Evidently, many of his fellow Cherokees considered him to be either mentally ill or actively pursuing evil. Absorbed as he was developing his talking leaves, he is said to have neglected his farm work and other responsibilities. At one point, either his work in progress or his entire cabin was burned, depending on the account, either by other Cherokees or by his own wife. Still, convinced of his project's value, Sequoyah refused to let these setbacks deter him. Eventually, he recognized that non-pictorial symbols were more versatile than pictographs, and that using a symbol for each syllable rather than for each word made for a more concise set of characters. Borrowing from English and other foreign characters he found in spellers or Bibles, he began forming his now famous syllabary, all the while listening intently to conversations in Cherokee and adding or removing characters as necessary. By 1821, with little to no external aid, save for the assistance of his young daughter Ayoka, Sequoyah had created 86 symbols, later reduced to 85, which encompassed the whole of the Cherokee spoken language. Completion, of course, did not by itself appease suspicious fellow Cherokees. Brought to trial for witchcraft, Sequoyah wrote down a dictated message in his new script, which Ayoka, who had not been present for the dictation, was later able to read aloud, word for word. Thus, having endured the laughter and censure of his countrymen for 12 years, he finally saw the first fruits of his labor. Meanwhile, a portion of the Cherokee people had moved from the southeast to present-day Arkansas, according to a treaty signed with the United States in 1817. Sequoyah's script now facilitated the sending of messages between the two regions. His system was evidently both effective and easy to learn. A mere 4 years later, when the Cherokee Nation officially adopted his syllabary, Cherokees had achieved a literacy rate surpassing that of their English-speaking neighbors. In 1824, Sequoyah was awarded a silver medal by the General Council of the Cherokee Nation, though by then he had evidently settled in Arkansas and did not receive the medal until years later. In 1828, following the establishment of a printing press in the eastern Cherokee capital of New Echota, the Cherokee Phoenix published its first newspaper, using a version of Sequoyah's script modified for printing, which remains the standard today. That same year, Sequoyah served as part of a Cherokee delegation to Washington, D.C., where he and his fellow envoys acceded to yet another treaty trading previously held lands for lands farther west, this time in present-day Oklahoma. A decade later, the vast majority of the Cherokees who had remained on their traditional lands were forced to join Sequoyah in the west via the so-called Trail of Tears. Sadly, some 5,000 Cherokees died en route. In 1842, Sequoyah embarked on a journey to Mexico, where he hoped to convince Cherokees who had settled there to join the reunited Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. He fell gravely ill along the way and died shortly after arriving at the Cherokee settlement. His fame, of course, has far outlived him. Less than a decade after his death, the Skin Bayou district where he lived in Oklahoma was renamed the Sequoyah District. Today, it's Sequoyah County, and his old cabin is a National Historic Landmark. In 1905, representatives of Indian Territory wrote a constitution for the proposed state of Sequoyah. Their plan, of course, was eventually rejected in favor of a joint Indian and Oklahoma Territory plan for statehood. All the same, today Sequoyah's likeness graces both Statuary Hall in the Capitol building and the bronze doors of the Library of Congress. Though the number of Cherokee speakers has dwindled over the decades, preservation efforts have led to the creation of an immersion school, which teaches Oklahoma standard curriculum with written materials exclusively in Sequoyah's syllabary. Meanwhile, Sequoyah remains the only man on record to have independently invented a written language without any previous understanding of another. His syllabary has directly inspired at least 21 scripts representing 65 languages worldwide. Whether or not the giant sequoia trees of California were named after our sequoia has been the subject of much debate. I can't honestly tell you if they were. What I can tell you is that when this Sasquatch finds himself in the presence of giant redwoods, he's more than happy to remember the Cherokee giant who preserved the voice of his people. Has there been another achievement in the field of language made by a single individual that compares to Sequoyah's? Let me know in the comments below. According to War Department records of the time, Sequoyah served as a private in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. If you're interested in learning more about the Creek Wars, check out this video on the War of 1812. And if you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, this is Bigfoot saying so long and save me a seat at your next campfire.